If I leave this world tomorrow, just know it was probably because of the friggin' Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, Jets fans, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Obviously, you're listening to this. The game is over and the Jets won, and that is putting it extremely lightly. Winnipeg played, honestly, the most drugged out, insane, crazy, bat poop, nuts game of the playoffs so far. Probably one of the most insane playoff games ever, right? The last time that you had like 13 goals in a game or something with a scoreline like 7-6 was, I think it was 2006, if I saw that stat correctly. And that was the first time back then since like 1985. It just does not happen. You never see this. But holy cow, if there was ever going to be an insane game that somehow involved one of the most ridiculous scorelines you will ever see in the playoffs, it just had to be Winnipeg, right? Why would we ever get just normal, average playoff hockey when you can basically just do something insane and have one of the most ridiculous back and forth, pendulum swinging, heart attack sort of games that you will ever see on ice? I mean, it was just, yeah. If you remember that old 9-8 Flyers game, that's kind of what you got with this Jets game. And it was crazy because you'd look at the 6 goals against and say, well, man, Hellebuyck must have been poor. And he wasn't. In fact, Hellebuyck was actually pretty darn good. But before we dive into some of the more specifics and trying to unpack what on earth we even just sat through and watched, I do want to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, like I said, unpacking this game is a very difficult affair. On the one hand, look, I'll come out right and say it. The Jets got outplayed. They were definitely the second best team in this game, and I think it was very obvious that compared to the last time the Jets saw Colorado, which was last week in Colorado, this team was not the same Avs that the Jets faced back then. But there was one constant between these two games, and it is Georgiev. Georgiev was atrocious. I think at one point in this game, he had 4 goals against on 10 shots. And look, they weren't crappy shots, but by the same token, your goalie has to give you a chance in this game, and Georgiev fell extremely short. Honestly, Colorado was only even in this game because their offense and power play managed to conjure up some really incredible and very timely goals, but not enough to get past the fact that Georgiev let in like 6 or so, or 7 goals. Very crazy from him, very bad game, and it's kind of been the story of the season, right? He's leading the league in wins, but you look at his save percentage, he was rocking like an .897 coming into the playoffs, right? That is just not anywhere near starting caliber, although this year, that's actually a little bit of a different story. A lot of goalies are kind of in his position, but if you're talking about a team like Colorado that basically lives or dies on rush counters and stuff, that means that your back end's going to be a little bit aggressive and leave your goalie exposed, and the Jets were able to take advantage enough to actually come away with a big victory. But digging into the meat of this game, right? Who really stood out? Well, for one thing, the top line was really good. This was one of the strongest games the top line has put up against Colorado in a very long time. Even compared to the last game, I think this one was more impressive because the Avs were faster, they were more aggressive, they looked like a genuine playoff team, and the top line was still able to dictate the pace. And one of the biggest reasons for that was because Adam Lowry and his line went to work against McKinnon. I know you'll probably see expected goal shares and game flow charts and stuff, and you'll see that the Lowry line didn't actually win their battle. But I'm telling you, if you actually look at how the Lowry line basically ate up a lot of the McKinnon minutes and ended up keeping Nate and his crew away from Hellebuyck as much as humanly possible. It softened up the rest of the matchups for Scheifele's line to feast. I think Lowry, in my mind, actually played one of the best games as a Jet he's ever played. Look, the reality is if you're going against McKinnon and Rantanen and guys like that, the best you can hope to do is limit their impact. And I think that's exactly what Lowry did. He ate up some of the toughest minutes, and he scored a couple of goals. I mean, that's just about as good as you could possibly ask for. When you have a shutdown player like Lowry, who's still versatile enough to add some offense, but also just generally control and manage one of the most dangerous players in the whole league, a potential Hart Trophy winner, it's just really hard to overstate how much of a win that is, because the other lines for the Jets were able to make hay and actually get some goals out of it, right? The only line that really struggled in this game, just from start to finish, was the second line. I thought Toffoli and Monahan weren't particularly great. Ehlers had some really good individual chances, but then there were moments where they just weren't on the same page. I think one of the most glaring things that I saw, Ehlers was sitting in the slot right in front of Georgiev, and Toffoli had the puck and was coming in from the right flank. And, like, I don't mind Toffoli taking the shot, but he had all day, and he had Ehlers literally wide open right in the slot, completely unmarked. And for some reason, he didn't opt to pass for what probably was going to be an easy goal. So, it was one of those sort of head-scratching games from the second line, one of the only times the second line has actually been bad recently. So, in the grand scheme of things, not too big of a concern. I think if you're looking for stuff that will bother the Jets, the blue line was kind of piecemeal. I thought Pionk had a really, really terrible game. And I hate to say it, but he's just been almost unplayable the last few months, and it's not really getting any better. Stanley also had a really rough game. I think that magic stretch of him where he looked comfortable and was able to play the puck out, just not now. I think this was a game where you saw the speed and pace and skill of Colorado really put him in a tight spot. And I know that, like, if you have Pionk alone, right, I don't think it's as big of a deal. But if you have both him and Stanley in the lineup, it means that you're a little bit more limited in the deep pairings that you can really trust. And I think Sandberg's turnover that led directly to a goal, I don't know if he was looking for somebody else that wasn't Stanley because he didn't trust him, or I don't quite know what was going through his mind, but I think it's time for one of Schmidt or Miller to come back in. I know Miller is kind of like, he's been okay. And Schmidt's kind of in that same category. But I think if I'm trusting veteran experience and guys who can, more quickly facilitate zone exits, probably would prefer those guys over Logan. Logan definitely, puts his heart out there. He's a gamer and a grinder, but we all know that, unfortunately, when it comes to defensive work, that's not really where he makes his bread and butter. So, yeah, some stuff to think about. Obviously, for the Jets, this game was very different than their last game against Colorado, and really a bit different than some of the other games in the season. I think Colorado's experience and skill shown in spades, right? And their game-breaking players were able to impact this game in a fairly big way. Makar, who is finally starting to get healthy again and look more like Cale Makar, had a goal. There were some nice setups from Rantanen and Lehkonen and some other guys who got on the score sheet. You also saw some contributions from guys like Miles Wood, who was a huge pain. Just, I think the Jets probably won't love the fact that the slot was kind of a welcome mat. They really struggled to clear that out. They had issues defending the crease. And so Hellebuyck had to make a lot of flurry saves and stuff. But I think overall, right, look, sometimes you're just going to have to take the game and say, okay, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't a Picasso, as Bones is famously known for saying. But at the end of the day, the Jets still got the job done. And you can probably trust Hellebuyck more than you can trust any of Colorado's goalies. So, yeah, some fun stuff. An exciting game. One of the craziest you'll ever see. But I think I want to spend some time sorting out some of the nutsness to talk about how the Jets can approach the rest of the series. And later on, we'll get into specific Game 2 adjustments. Before we dive into all of that, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, and baseball's in full swing, so FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Whether you're an Orioles fan like me, which I know none of you are, you're all Jays fans or some other team, maybe the Twins, heaven help you if you are, but no matter what, all of you are probably Jets fans, or at least I hope you are. If you're an Avs fan listening, well, thank you very much. But of course, either way, whether you're an MLB or an NHL fan, or even, say, I don't know, an auto racing fan, they've got all of the fun sports and they want to help you win because right now new customers can get $100, $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. While we're at it, I also do want to shout out our friends and partners at Policy Genius. Obviously, as somebody who goes to a lot of metal concerts, you might say that I've made some very poor life choices. Sometimes I like to go in the pit, and I have been left with more than one injury. Unfortunately, both left me hospitalized. And look, we all know that, especially if you're an American, health insurance and stuff is really expensive. But, at the end of the day, you still need a policy, and especially a life insurance policy, because, look, you can't prepare for what's going to happen. There are freak accidents all the time. And you want to make sure that, your loved ones are taken care of. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. I think for a lot of you, you'd love help to try and actually figure out what policy makes the most sense, what insurer you should be using, and Policy Genius can make all of it very simple. You'll talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step, and you can easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On and Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just slowly decompressing from a crazy day of playoff hockey. Obviously, some of the games earlier weren't that impressive, but Winnipeg, Colorado, and Nashville, Vancouver just wrapped up with some pretty darn fantastic hockey, some very crazy score lines, some very crazy in-game happenings. And I think for a lot of us, we weren't really expecting what we saw in Winnipeg's game because, wow, 76, not a scoreline that I think any of us were predicting, but a huge, tremendous win. And, this is, it's a stat that doesn't technically mean anything because any series can go a different way, even after a big win. But I'll tell you what, 68% of teams that win the first game go on to win the series. So for the Jets, I think that really can't be overstated. At least one win on their current progress to knocking out the Avs is a pretty tremendous accomplishment. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. Now, I did want to talk about sorting through some of the noise and trying to figure out some things that I think are going to be repeatable, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we go too much further, though, I did want to let you know something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Now, circling back to the Jets, look, this game has a lot of noise, right? Random variance is a bit of a pain, especially when you're talking about goaltending and stuff. Georgiev's performance, that's actually pretty consistent with him just not being very good. We didn't see Annunen or Arvid Holm. Annunen was actually out for this game. Arvid Holm was brought in on an emergency basis to back up. If we do see him in the next game, Lord help him, because he's going to be in for a bit of a buzzsaw. Arvid, of course, we know from his Manitoba Moose days, never really got much of an NHL shake, and I don't know that any of us thought he'd actually be an NHL caliber goalie. I can't imagine that you go from either one of him or Annunen after Georgiev and really feel comfortable. I know Annunen's had like a 925 or 928 this season in like 14 games. That's a really small sample size. And the last time the Jets saw him, they put 3 past him. So, yeah, probably not feeling super secure. And mind you, those 3 goals came after he came on in relief of Georgiev, who got chased. So, not exactly a comforting thought if you're an Avs fan. As far as the Jets are concerned, though, some interesting things did kind of pop out to me. I think one of the most surprising things was how good the Jets' power play looked. I know that we've talked about it being a huge sore spot in the past. This time, and look, it didn't score, but I thought the puck movement was very crisp. I thought the unit was extremely dangerous. It honestly had some of the best movement we've seen in the Jets power play from both units in some time. It actually came really close to scoring on one or two occasions. Was probably thanks to a great save or maybe an unlucky deflection or a good block that the Jets did not capitalize on at least one of them. The special teams unit, though, that looked really bad. No surprise here. It was the penalty kill. The Jets did not kill either of their penalties. And look, I know it's Colorado. They do this to pretty much everyone. But by the same token, you really have to have at least one kill against this Avs PP. And I know it's asking a lot, but, it's really a situation where if Colorado has, generally been neutralized at even strength, you cannot give them a single into this game. The moment the Avs start building momentum, their pace picks up, the ability for them to pressure all up and down the ice becomes apparent, and their counters get even more lethal. Partly because you start, second-guessing yourself, you start making some mistakes, and the Avs are super good at taking advantage of mental gaffes. Now, in this game, the Jets were actually able to do the same thing to Colorado, so it was basically a last mistake wins, or I guess last mistake loses in this case. And I think for the Jets, they were, the team that benefited from this because Colorado had the last mistake. Kyle Connor managed to score what would actually become the game winner. I don't think any of us thought it was going to be like that. It was like 7-4 at the time or 7-3. So, yeah, probably not aligned to expectations for this game. But I mean, at the same time, it's going to happen once in a while. I'm really shocked it happened to the Jets in this game, especially after how good they've been against Colorado. But early on in this game, I will say one thing that really did bother me was that, especially in the opening half of the first period, the Jets played scared. They tried to bully Colorado, and that's just not a viable tactic. The Avs have been here before, right? They're a Stanley Cup winning team. They're experienced. They're savvy. They've walked the walk, and they've talked the talk, and they've won a cup out of it. So, for me, it's just a weird strategy when you already know that you've outplayed them in many games. And that wasn't going to happen in this game necessarily, but if you started out on the wrong foot and put yourself behind the 8 ball, before you knew it, you were already down 1-0, and you had been basically dominated for the first 10 minutes. Once the Jets got back to what I'll call their identity, it was a lot more composed, not necessarily smooth sailing, but it was a lot better. And that's the thing I don't understand, right? Like, I don't like the phrase, the identity thing when you talk about teams, because I think sometimes it's a little overstated, but I think if you think about it more in how you have a general technical philosophy, the Jets aren't a team that bullies other teams, right? They're a pretty skilled, heavy forechecking, but not really like overly physical team. That's not their game. And the moment that they got away from it, Colorado started to take advantage and really dominated control, right? If you just go for hits and stuff, that's not really helpful. And I think the Jets kind of fooled themselves into thinking that they weren't the better team at times. And look, Colorado was the stronger team in this game, but the Jets have, on the score sheet, bullied them for the last entire regular season series. So for me, I just don't quite know why the Jets came out with such a scared approach. For me, the Jets should be confident. Go out there. You've done it in the regular season. You've impressed everyone. Go and show the home fans what you're really made of. I will say that it was a very fun game, and what was great was that the fans really seemed to buy into it. The crowd noise was raucous. Canada Life Center was rollicking. It felt a lot like 2018 when, the Pred series was there. I was blessed to attend a couple of those games, and wow, I wish I was in Winnipeg right now to experience that again. I think I'm, trying to get up at some point during this postseason run. We'll have to see how deep the Jets go, but already notching that first win at home is a huge step towards advancing to the next couple of rounds. We'll see if the Jets can do it, but 1 win down and 15 to go. Now, of course, for the Jets, there's a couple of things that they're going to want to clean up before they get to game 2. Stuff that I think is relatively fixable. It's nothing that I think is going to be too much of a problem for this team. They've already shown that they can play against Colorado well in other games. This is one of the sloppiest games that they've had against them this year, and I expect it'll probably be as bad as it gets unless, these teams really do surprise me. Before we talk about some potential adjustments for the Jets to make, just wanted to let you know something really cool. Our friends at Game Time are offering some really great specials. And of course, they have also become an authorized marketplace for Major League Baseball, which means for those of you who are Jays fans, or like I said, maybe even Twins fans, obviously, you're looking for prices and deals that actually fit your budget. And Game Time knows that when you're buying tickets, especially from other sellers and stuff, you get hit with a lot of surprise charges, dynamic fees, and all sorts of fun stuff. And sometimes you're not even sure where you're actually sitting. Game Time wants to make it as helpful and easy as possible by offering you killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and even views from your seat. So you'll find out that you're actually not sitting at Fenway Park behind a pillar, right? We all know those infamous obstructed views, and Game Time wants to take that away from you. They don't want to make you sit behind a pillar unless you're actually interested in buying that. I mean, hey, maybe you like staring at a giant column for the entire game, but I think most people would actually want to see what they're paying for. Game Time also makes sure to offer you flash deals and zone deals so that you'll save as much money as possible, and they all come back with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up really quickly with some thoughts ahead of Game 2, right? Jets had some very interesting things happen in the first game. Some stuff that I think they're going to be happy with, some stuff that I think they're going to really dislike, and I think it's time to talk about some adjustments heading into game number 2. One of the first things that I think the Jets are going to want to avoid is, giving up the slot in the faceoff circles and crease. Those spaces are traditionally areas where the Jets have been stingy, but they weren't stingy in this game. Colorado kind of cut them up the middle, and I think in future games, they're really going to want to make sure that they kind of block those areas out. Hellebuyck had to deal with a lot of traffic, which caused a lot of screens and tips. I don't think he really enjoyed that, and, Colorado scored quite a few goals off of that. But, it is the Avs. I mean, they kind of do this to everyone. So, how much can we really be upset? I do think that compared to some of the other games, this one was a little more run and gun than the Jets would probably like. I think Winnipeg kind of needs to go back to the template of clogging up the neutral zone and essentially cutting down so much of what makes Colorado dangerous, right? The Avs game is kind of predicated on speed. Those rapid north-south counters with guys like McKinnon. Look, you can't stop McKinnon, right? That's not really how that works. You just sort of impede and slow him down or slow his teammates down and limit the number of scoring options that he has because he will beat you at some point. It's almost inevitable. He's just that good. He beat Hellebuyck in one moment tonight, but, it wasn't really a goal that I think should have happened, and I'm going to guess Hellebuyck's probably not going to love it. But otherwise, it's just McKinnon being McKinnon. He had another chance where he kind of got a step on Dylan DeMello and rang one off the post. That almost went in. I actually think it went off the crossbar, but, generally the same outcome, right? He's just going to have to be one of those guys where you're aware of him, but the main goal, right, the main approach is to clog up the neutral zone, limit their zone entries, and frustrate them. If you can get Colorado slowed down, they are a lot more vulnerable than you'd think. And I think Winnipeg did a really good job of doing it in the last game and essentially limiting their space and time so that by the time Colorado actually gained speed, the Jets were already prepared to hit them on a counter. That's the sort of thing that really frustrated the Avs. They got into undisciplined situations, and I think the Jets can probably do something similar. Although I will say, with the Avs finding a lot more space and time, that may be a lot harder to pull off. But, the Jets have shown that there is a template for beating this team. It's a template that has worked for some other teams, but I think specifically with the way the Jets are constructed, they have perhaps the best tool set available to do that because this is a heavy forechecking team. The Jets can be a very pesky, frustrating squad to play against. And when Winnipeg is pushing all energy out to essentially close down those gaps, limit the space, and basically take away the time that, Colorado needs to get their passes and stuff off, it's a very different game. And I think the Jets kind of had a tough time in this one. It was a much faster game than they're used to. They had to constantly chase the play, and sometimes the forwards were cheating for offense when, honestly, if they saw that the D were kind of struggling to make the zone exits, just drop back, right? Like, I know you're waiting for that breakout and stretch pass because you want to catch Colorado pinched really deep, but by the same token, the Jets D were kind of doing the same thing, and I think the Jets forwards should have offered more defensive support. It wasn't every line that had this problem, but there were a couple where they were playing a little bit too high, and I think that's something that the coaching staff will probably talk about. Otherwise, I think the main thing is just coming out of the gate strong. Don't sit back and let Colorado dictate the terms early. Don't go for physical hits unless it's really helpful. Stop just trying to hit everything that moves. That's not your style. That's not your identity. And this team is much better when they play to their strengths and their skill. I think the Jets showed us what happens, towards the second half of period 2 when they start to control and dominate play with waves of pressure. Colorado really had no answer. The Jets were the much stronger team then. I think Winnipeg was able to really dictate the terms. And, for the Jets, I think that's most important. If they can play the game on their terms, Colorado is going to have a much, much harder time breaking up the cycle and forechecking that the Jets are able to pull off, because Winnipeg works best when they really hem you in and create those waves of pressure as you change lines. I would also like to see 1 or 2 personnel changes. Like I said, I think it's probably time for Stanley to come out. Bless him, he did try really hard, but he just wasn't able to keep up with the pace of the game. And I think Schmidt or Miller would be fine here. I think it would also help Sandberg, because Dylan didn't seem like he wanted to defer to Stanley very much. And if you're kind of on an island like that, you're going to force passes into coverage more often than not. And we saw that on a number of occasions in this game, where not only Sandberg, but some of the other blue liners were passing into very bad situations. So let's avoid that. Let's not see that again. Like I said, I think this first game was pretty freaky, all told. Excuse me. It was one of the drunkest games I've ever seen. I thought maybe 420 was still hanging around after yesterday. But man, whatever was in the water or in the air, the Jets and Avs probably played one of the most chaotic games you will ever see in the playoffs. I expect game 2 to be a lot closer. I expect it to be a much more tight run affair, but we'll see if the Jets make any adjustments to their personnel. We might see the return of like Morgan Barron. I don't know how long he's going to be sidelined for. Not that Gustafson was bad. I think he was fine. I would just say, like, Cole Perfetti, I think, would have been helpful in a game like this, right? I've talked about it before, but Perfetti's passing and vision and offense, especially when you're trading blows in a run and gun style of game, and you need a really smart, savvy player who can also force turnovers and make really strong defensive plays. That's where Perfetti probably would have been a bit of a help. But at this point, it is what it is. We just have to hope that, the run is long enough and good enough that he can feel comforted knowing that he's been part of a really strong roster that, is getting closer and closer to pushing for a cup. So lots of exciting stuff. Tomorrow's episode, we'll probably talk about some of the other playoff series, early results and stuff, maybe some observations from teams the Jets might face in a future round. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. So as always, go Jets go.